I'm using Zoom for this video. I just thought I'll point that out because I had enough difficulty figuring out how to do it myself. Um, I'm not usually on YouTube, and certainly this would be one of the first times that you would have seen me speaking online. My name is Jonathan Tagg, and I'm better known as JT. Um, I have a background in computer technical support and languages. Although currently I work for one of the health and social care trusts in Northern Ireland as a frontline member of staff. Now, with that said, I am not a healthcare professional, and my work has no bearing on my understanding of the current situation, other than my experience from listening to patients that I've met in the course of my work and discussions that I've had with colleagues. And it's fair to say that they hold a variety of views. On Facebook, I'm a member of Collective Action Northern Ireland, which is a Facebook group, without a political agenda, and they share a common belief that the restrictions imposed on us in relation to COVID-19 are both disproportionate and ineffective. I think it would be wrong for me to say more about the group because it's a group of individuals, and we have no leader per se. We all have our own opinions and motivations, and it's in that context that I'm speaking to you now. There's a lot of fear in the community. Some of it's rational, particularly among people with a variety of underlying health conditions and those who are more vulnerable due to their age. Nevertheless, it is tiring. I think most of us are getting quite weary by the constant hype in the mainstream media. When the virus was at its height, there was a constant rolling death toll reported day in, day out on the TV and the radio, and I think it caused many of us undue stress and anxiety. It's well known if you have the wrong attitude to stress, it in and of itself can be lethal. I'm going to put a few links in the description to this, and one of the links I'm hoping to include has some good advice on attitudes to stress and how to manage it. To get to the crux of what the video is about, I want to refer you to a government agency's own facts, and that is the monthly death figures published by the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency. I've chosen this for a number of reasons, but primarily because they're produced by a government agency. There's plenty of people who are skeptical of groups like Collective Action Northern Ireland, who think that we're a bunch of conspiracy theorists and that we've got no real basis for our opinions. So let me give you some real verifiable facts, which I don't suggest that you take at face value. I'll include links to the file that I'm going to show you, and I suggest that you go and check it out for yourselves, check that the figures are accurate, and as I mentioned before, the mainstream are constantly referring to numbers of people whose death were recorded as being linked to COVID-19. Now, at some point, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure when it was, there was a change. The media stopped placing the emphasis on deaths and began reporting numbers of cases. For me, this was a red flag. I wondered why had they done this. It didn't seem right. We're no longer talking about deaths. You can no longer compare the death figures with what they were previously whenever we're just talking about cases, and it just seems strange. So basically it was already apparent that the numbers of deaths were on the decline, and in other words, deaths were no longer sufficient to maintain the fear which fuels compliance with the restrictions imposed on us. Now, there could be a number of different motives as to why the change was made. One approach that I'll call the white lie approach could be if government genuinely believed that COVID-19 was a serious risk to public health. They might have thought it necessary to find a way to encourage compliance with the restrictions. Um, I'm not so sure. I mean, the fact that COVID-19 was declassified as a a high consequence infectious disease on the 19th of March, which was actually before the lockdown, leads me to think that that's not correct. After all, even though declassifying as a high consequence infectious disease doesn't say that there's no risk, and in fact may still mean that there's quite a severe risk. If you hadn't imposed lockdown when you did think it was an HCID, why would you then impose it whenever you decided that it wasn't? Another hypothesis I'll call the fire prevention approach. And that could be perhaps where knowing that there was like a 2 to 3 week time lag between people contracting the virus and developing full-blown disease. One way to reduce the time lag might be to identify cases at an early stage and then put restrictions in place locally to prevent many more people becoming infected where you have identified clusters. But again, when you look at the restrictions, in Northern Ireland at present, there's restrictions on domestic gatherings, and yet at the same time, commercial interests are permitted to continue. And those seem logically to be just as potentially risky. So that doesn't appear to fly either. My final best guess, if you like, as to why you would choose to cite case figures rather than deaths is hypothetically speaking, you could imagine that as herd immunity is established, the peak of cases would be achieved, and it would then fall away in a similar way to the death figures. In relation to the death figures, I've heard it called the Gompertz curve in the past. I'll call this the statistically indicative approach. Now, that is well and good in theory, but just from listening to the media, testing appears to have been much too sporadic and inconsistent over time to be able to place much faith in how many people have tested positive for COVID-19 during a particular day or week, and with much certainty to be able to compare accurately with previous days and weeks. So if that were the strategy, I think they've failed in its implementation. For it to be a reliable method, government would have had to be testing virtually identical numbers of people in each geographical area over a statistically significant period, and the reality seems to be that that simply hasn't happened. Now, in fairness to the government, there could be a number of reasons for that, and some of them may not be entirely down to ineptitude in government departments. Now, if I share my screen, I should be able to show you the file that I want to draw your attention to, and hopefully you will be able to see it now. So this file is a file that comes from the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency. It is entitled Monthly Deaths, and as you can see, the statistics are listed by month of registration, and also then by the year in which they occurred. So the earliest figure that is there is January 2006 with 1,367 deaths. And you can see the figures as the year progresses. When you get to the end of the year, then there's a total given for the year. So if we look at this year, as you can see, obviously it's not complete yet. And the latest figures that we have go as far as August. Sorry, actually, before I get on to that, I just want to explain that the part that I'm going to highlight now of the file is the part which is actually in the NISRA file. The other bits around the edges I have added on myself to be able to try to make some sense out of them. So this is the bit that comes from NISRA, and then the other bits at the edges I have put in. So as I say, coming back then to 2020, you can see that in January we had 1,668 deaths. Now, going by this little legend, those are provisional data, although I would have thought by this stage of the year that's unlikely to change much. So for comparison, because if you look at the figures for January, you'll see that there's a bit of variance. I'm not just sure, well, at a quick look across there, the lowest figure in January appears to be from 2006. Now, I think it's reasonable to say that the population may well have increased slightly from that time. And that's why what I've decided to do is, rather than to kind of make a comparison from as far back as that, I've selected the last 5 years. So from 2015 to 2019, and I have calculated the average figure. So in other words, that arrives here. So the average monthly deaths for January 2015 to 2019 is 1,716. So it's the average of those. And then that continues as you go down. So if you actually look at the figure for 2020, for January, it was actually less than that. There was 1,668. And what I have done in this column on the right there is just to work out the difference between this year and the average. And that's why then, because there were fewer deaths in January this year than the previous, than the average for the 5 previous years, you've got a negative figure. So negative indicates fewer. So in January we had fewer deaths. February and March also fewer deaths, and then we have this abnormal rise in April. 673 more than average for the previous 5 years. It declines, still a rise, but not to the same extent. In May, we had 195 more than the average for the 5 previous years. June and July broadly similar. You could say about 80 odd for those both. And then the last figure there for August, we had 10 more deaths in August 2020 than the average for the previous 5 years. That number 10 really, you could, if we were to insert that into the table for August there, it would just disappear in terms of being something that's remarkable. It isn't remarkable. 10 more deaths in August this year is near enough a normal figure. Now, what I have done at the bottom here is I have calculated the total change. So in other words, basically the total of these figures. So how many more people than average died in 2020 compared to the average for the previous 5 years, and going by that, at present, best guess, well, not a guess, the result of that is 856. If you look at the bottom bit, let me see, I've worked out here, I've called this variance from average. Now I'm just trying to remember what exactly it was that I've calculated there. Maybe the formula will help. So this is for 2015. I was looking at JS, which is, sorry, J18. J18 is here. Okay, so sorry, the annual average (2015 to 2019). Okay, so this is actually just looking at totals by the look of it. I'm not sure why I've calculated that, to be honest. Perhaps it's to try to see how much the figure may change each year. I suppose really probably what I was trying to do was to compare this figure to see if it could almost appear normal at any stage. It doesn't appear to. So the average for the 5 previous years was 15,738 people died per year, and then that varies in a range of somewhere around -300 to +300 odd. So this year does look different. Right, sorry, I lost my track a wee bit there. Let me get back on track. The final bit that I just wanted to point out here is just in relation to August itself. As I've already said, this year there were 10 more deaths in August than the average for the previous 5. Of those years, so 2016 and 2018 in August, I've literally just copied the figures downwards. There was 1,258 in August 2016, and in August 2018 there were 1,230 deaths. And then when you compare that with the 1,174 deaths in August 2020, you see that the numbers for 2016 and 2018 were greater by 84 and 56 respectively. So that just lets you see in context this number 10 for August this year. Now, just to come back to the start again, so to speak. It's good to see that these numbers are declining. And actually, let me just share the screen because I haven't actually really highlighted that. So if we look at the numbers from April, so as I say, up to April, the numbers were actually less than the average for the previous 5 years. Then there was this spike in April, and that has been trending downwards ever since. Even June and July, where they were nearly the same, it was still going the right direction. August, even better. What I have done then is I've actually created a little chart. Now, in fairness, I have to say I am not good at this. And I haven't put the labels on, so it's going to need a bit of explanation. Just to explain what that shows, that is a plot using these figures. So it's the average deaths for the months January to August for the years 2015 to 2019, and then the change plus or minus from the average for 2020, and that gives you this. So along the bottom here is the months. So you've got January, February, March, and so on. Easily identifiable actually by the numbers. So 8 is August. And that's, in terms of the actual numbers here, the blue bars represent the figures for average monthly deaths from 2015 to 2019. The red line underneath is the variance from the average in terms of the figures for this year. So as I've already said before, January, February and March, the figure was actually less than the average, and that's why it appears less than zero. Then we had the peak, the spike, so to speak, in April, falling back a bit in May, and then flattening out nicely in June, July, and particularly in August. So hopefully September we may see another hopefully in September we may see that trend continue, and hopefully we can get out of lockdown sometime soon. The reality is that there's a vote, I believe there's a vote in the House of Commons tomorrow in relation to the renewal of the coronavirus restrictions, and there's a number of amendments that are tabled in relation to that, one of which is hoping to see any changes, particularly changes, I suppose, that would make things tighter, having to go through Parliament to be voted on, and I'm hoping that that goes through. Right, that is it. Sorry if it's been a bit hesitant and a bit long and all the rest. As I say, I'm not no expert at this, and I am just trying to make the best of what I've got. Hopefully it is of some use to you. Hopefully you've got some information, and feel free to share anything else that you think is useful. And who knows, I may be back here soon. Hopefully not, because I'm not good at it, but we'll see. Cheerio.